So making a recap, after bishop d3 and then c5, the most popular move is c3. So black now plays immediately queens to c7. The thing is that the pawn in c5 now is actually under attack because white will have won a tempo. And black doesn't really want to defend the pawn in c5 with by moving e6 and allowing the bishop, because then this bishop, the light square bishop, is locked. So after queen c7 and knight f3, black plays knight to c6, all very normal moves, easy to remember. And after castling, black plays bishop to g4. So there's a very simple way to play against this opening. Two options we're going to look at, which is h3 and white capturing the pawn in c5. Now that the knight is covering c6 and the queen is not really defending, if white takes in c5, black plays e5, the idea of making a fork. So after bishop to e2, black recaptures in c5. So that was why that plan of trying to get material advantage, pawn advantage, didn't really work. So let's see how to continue now in this type of game, because this is probably one of those moments where you don't really know what to do. So after h3, black takes the knight, surprisingly. Well, not really surprisingly, because this is a pattern to remember. Bishop takes back unless white wants to open up his king. But after that, e4, and now the bishop has to move again. And he's got really nowhere to go except e2. Black now continues with queen to e5. And so why that move? Why bishop takes f3? Because now that the knight in f3 is gone, and we have a pawn in e4 anyway, potentially taking the pawn in f4 en passant, then we are exerting a lot of pressure on the king side with the pawn, a lot of control actually, and we're going to infiltrate the pieces. Also, white bishop, the dark side bishop, can't really go anywhere. The knight doesn't have a future if he goes to d2 because he really can't move anywhere. So after queen to b3, attacking the pawn in b7, that's just an example I'm making. This is actually bad and is punished immediately. Also because there was no other option. Black plays bishop d6. He ignores this pawn that comes with a fork because he's threatening checkmates after g3. Only move, also because f4 doesn't work. You can just take en passant and continue with your crashing attack. After g3, black castles long side, and it looks crazy, but it's actually very safe. So what to do for white? There's nothing much actually. Can't really move the king or the rook anywhere useful. And so after knight a3, only move that can come to mind, especially after the idea of knight to b5 and potentially pushing the pawn eventually. How to deal with this? This is very easy. And how to continue the attack? h5, of course. And after knight to b5, attacking the bishop, it is crucial that we keep the bishop alive. So bishop to b8. And now, what happens if white plays a move that, I mean, because we all know that right now black wants to play h4, right? To put more and more pressure over g3. What happens if white plays it first? How do we respond to such attack? Well, in these patterns, you have to do this, g5. And you are inevitably going to smash the king side with the arrival of the rooks. And, well, if pawn takes, then queen g5 ends the game. There's just too much now on that is going on the king side. The game is evaluated like -10. So if instead white doesn't play a move like h4, but rather plays c4, idea of opening up the king, the king, the file of the king, and potentially suggesting some swap, also reducing the control of these two pawns, maybe limiting black to only have one pawn in e4 without its usual support of the pawn in d5. Black continues then with h4, so that was inevitably going to happen. Black is winning this game. The last attempt we're going to look at is queen c3, trying to swap queens, is actually met by a pawn takes in g3, because now it's already too late for white to defend this, and it wasn't possible anyway. White can't take back due to the massive threat, so after takes, black takes back with a knight, and inevitably is going to put the rook up and then pile up the rooks and so on. Right, so one more recap. After these moves, c5 and then c3, black continues with queen c7, knight f3, knight c6, castle, everything normal, and now bishop to g4. Earlier we went through pawn takes, this time let's go through h3, bishop h5, no reason to swap. And now, two main options. Let's quickly go through pawn takes now. And then the next one will be the more important, knight to d2, which is there to support the attack on e4 eventually, and to support the knight as well. So how do we face this pawn in c5? Very similarly to before, e5 threatens a fork, and after bishop to e2, bishop to c5, everything looks like before. Let's look at this option this time. This is a very popular move, happens a lot. Idea was to give the c pawn for the d pawn, and make the queen stronger. We have to take. The bishop can't really take back yet because this knight is pinned. So after g4, how do we fight against such idea? Well, bishop to g6 first of all, and now the white player can take this back. So in this variation of the Colle system, we are looking at when white pushes the pawn on the king side. We try to analyze as many scenarios as possible so that every time you play against the Colle, you will have some memories of how to deal with each type of scenario. How to continue now? Rook to d8, attacking the queen. Best response is queen to b3. Now, of course, knight a5 isn't really effective because white has available checks. So after e4, best move by black. This move here in this type of opening, when they play d4 and then the passive e3 without this bishop moving, this e4 move is incredible because it just stops the white player from having a knight in f3, and it stops the pawn from moving, and our dark square attacking pieces will be super strong. How do we fight against knight to h4 attacking the bishop? Then simply h5. The idea here is, of course, we don't care about the bishop pair if we are going to open up entirely the king side. So after knight takes, pawn takes, the queen still safeguarding the f7 square, and black has an idea of winning the pawn and checkmating very soon. So what happens after g-file? White wants to close up the files so that this rook is ineffective and this knight will have to move again. Black continues with knight to g4, crushing sacrifice. This is threatening checkmate, and once it's taken, the rook and the queen will have an excellent cooperation. So if takes, takes. It's game over. So let's make one more recap and we go through the other move. After bishop d3 and then c5 and then c3, queen c7, the knights, and then castle, bishop g4, h3 is met by bishop h5. What happens when white plays knight to d2? Usually they want to play this move e4, open the center, then put the rook on the open file and develop the pieces better and reduce black's control of the center. Well, black now plays e6. So there's two options now we're going to look at, which is e4 and queen to c2. e4 doesn't really work because black will take the pawn in d4. And now the pawn in d4 cannot be taken because this knight is pinned and we have an attack on d4. And white will have to eventually play a move like g4 in order to unpin the knight. But even then, black can take the knight with the check, remove the bishop, and white will have these weak h3, g4 squares, pawns, and the king side is completely open. So after white's best move, which is to take the pawn in d5, the idea is to open up the file of the king and allow potentially the development of the pieces as white was meant to. Black recaptures with the knight. So let's look in this scenario. A move like g4 now, of course, is met with bishop g6, and after knight to e4, we're looking at this other type of idea this time. Black takes in c3, pawn takes, and now black continues with rook to d8. This is a situation I've encountered already. The idea now could be a c4, but that doesn't work because knight to b4 and it's putting too much pressure on the bishop. And protecting it in like knight e1, for example, doesn't work because you can just take in e4. So this idea about knight to e4, the idea ignoring the attack on c3, doesn't really work. So in this situation, just a few moves ago, the best move by the white player, of course he can't take in d4 with the knight, so he's got to take with the pawn. This is the best move according to the engine. Black continues with bishop e7. Now, queen to c2 loses to this typical pattern. We've all seen this before, but it's not like he loses like immediately, but he will have to give up this very strong bishop, which is crucial in the Colle system. And queen to e2 doesn't make sense because of queen to of knight d4. So let's look at the idea when white wants to unpin the knight. Just place queen to e1. The queen is on an open file. The knight is simply threatening to get moving, and white will finally be able to finish development in his passive opening. Black continues with castling, and after knight to e5, taking the pawn in d4 obviously is bad because of queen e4 threatening checkmate, and then the knight cannot really move to f5 because these two pieces might get forked. So best move by black now is knight to f4, attacking the bishop, and after knight taking, finally the strong knight in c6, which is also the attacker of the isolated pawn. Black takes back with the queen, threatening checkmate. So this is just ideas. Best move by white is saving the bishop and attacking the queen at the same time and preventing checkmate. These are all very accurate computer moves that are there trying to resist against black's supremacy against such a passive opening. Black now goes on to win with this move, knight to e2 check. Also because think about it, what other option was there? How do you stop this checkmate in g2? And you also have got to defend this bishop. Another idea could have been queen to e4, but now black takes the bishop, queen takes back, and then rook f to d8. Black has a solid advantage and is going to a winning endgame, exploiting the isolated pawn and the bishop pair, so something like this. Black is evaluated like -2. So in this position, after bishop e4, black goes on with knight e2 check, and after king to h1, of course it would be silly to go on a dark square considering black's pieces. Black's best move is queen to a6 in order to safeguard the knight, especially if white were to attack the bishop. So let's quickly go through two main options that white can try to use to fight back. One of them is knight f3, going to something that looks like a natural position. And the other one is b3 to develop the bishop. So after b3, let's see, black continues with bishop b4, pinning the knight. Bishop b2 is met by f5. The bishop's got nowhere to go except c2 or b1 actually, but that is ridiculous. Like the way this rook is kept, yeah, it looks like these bishops can move anytime, but black will control the open files and infiltrate. Black's best move now is rook to c8, rook a to c8, and the position is considered like quite a solid advantage for black. So in this position, instead of b3, what happens after knight f3? Black bishop takes, and after bishop takes back, black can go and win the pawn, threatening the obvious. So after bishop going back to e4, controlling the square c2, black plays rook a to c8, and this is where you realize that black's advantage, even if we could even give up the bishop pair, black has an extra pawn, and anyway black is going to win material by going to c2. It's inevitable. Bishop e3 is met by this, so that means that white can't really develop, and the queen is putting pressure on this rook, meaning that this queen isn't really going to be able to support the bishop in the defense of c2. One attempt they might try is bishop to d2. Look, this is the best move according to the computer. Knight c2 knight is happening, so bishop takes unless white wants to lose material, rook takes, and now bishop c3, which is kind of a nice place to be for the bishop, and this rook isn't really can really be backed up by the other rook. So now black continues with rook e2, and after queen to c1, queen to c4, this bishop doesn't have any checks. Inevitably we're going to be challenging the bishop, something like bishop e4 for instance, swapping everything, and then we will be controlling the file, plus we have extra pawn. An attempt could be b3, but now simply queen to d3, rook to d1, and now queen to f5, going for this pawn in f2. All of these moves are forced. I mean, white's moves are not forced. They are the best moves. But black's replies to such moves forcing white to reply in certain ways. Bishop to d4 to guard the pawn. Black continues with rook to c2, and after the queen moves, finally we can back up the rooks. Now a move like bishop takes a7 doesn't work because of bishop f6, trapping the rook, or potentially forcing a swap of bishop so that we have full access of the queen over the king side. And for example, if white plays anything else like b4, idea of allowing the queen a way out, then bishop f6, and we are indeed forcing a swap, and we're going to win the endgame. So one more recap. After bishop d3 and then c5 and then c3, queen c7, the knights are going out, the king is castling, and then bishop g4. h3, we move back to h5, and after knight to d2, we play e6. So earlier we went through e4, and all that happens next. As we said, we're going to go through this move, which is also popular and can be played in this moment because the knight doesn't have access to d4 or b4. Black now plays the incredible g5. The idea is to smash everything around the king side. So white now can play some options like knight g5 is no good because c4 traps the bishop. Bishop can't go anywhere. e2 is not accessible because the bishop, and after bishop takes, knight takes, and after knight takes, we can't take back because of the queen, this queen here, but we can play bishop to e7, stopping the knight from moving anywhere, and then bishop g6 should do the job. In this situation, after g5, if white tries e4 now, he's got a lot of attack over such square. Black continues by long castle, placing the rook in an excellent file. Let's have a look at this type of idea. e5 attacking the knight in f6. Black plays g4. This is the most active way to reply. If white takes back, then this knight doesn't have to be lost. So black's already winning here. Let's have a look at this reply. Knight to h4, which still provides defense over g2, meaning yes, we are going to take in h3, white will take a knight. We're done a piece. How to continue now? This is met by pawn takes in g2, and after knight takes, bishop to d6. The idea is to reach the square g8 with the rook. After f4, most active reply by white, and rook g8. Rook f2 to put more defense. We're still done a piece. Black continues with c4, which allows the bishop to go to f1 and puts even more defense. How to continue this attack? Take the pawn in f4, since the knight is pinned. After knight f3, white can finish the development, and it looks like we're not going to be able to checkmate this king because there's a huge number of pieces around him. Black can continue now with bishop to g3, bishop to g3, which is the best move. Bishop h6 is best move by white. The idea is to blockade the whole file of the king and force black to give up the exchange. Black's best move now is the genial rook to g4, which saves the rook from such a forced passivity. After bishop to g7, for instance, black now continues with bishop to g6, best move. The queen will have to move, and yes, black is still down material, but there's a huge pressure. And look at this, there's like 5 pieces around the king, but they really can't move without huge trouble. After queen e2 and rook to g8, white's best move is knight to d2, and black's best is rook to g5, keeping the pressure. After white's best move, which is rook to f3, removing the rook from the attack of the bishop, although we didn't want to take that because we're planning something else. Bishop h2 check, king h1, and now bishop h5 pins. Or if the rook had stays, it doesn't pin, it skews. If the rook had stayed in f2, we could have taken it eventually, and we would have been able to play with the h pass pawn anyway. White has a response after bishop h5 attacking the rook and the queen behind it, which is queen e3 attacking this rook, but that doesn't really work. We can take the rook. Queen taking g5. Let's remember that the queen in g5 and the knight in g2, there's a bishop and the queen here, and they could pick up material. So after queen takes back, best move in f3. Black knight goes to e7. Idea of eventually capturing this bishop with a bit of a maneuver. So after queen h3, best move by white to put more attack over h2. Knight to f5. Incredibly enough. Well, not really incredibly, because this is no longer possible to be taken. But that is also best move by white at the same time. Queen takes, rook. So after queen takes and then knight g3. Material is kind of similar, but white's king's position is terrible. So white can't afford to do that. So after rook h5, white's best move, quite difficult to find, but still, it's knight to h4, which we can take like this, and this time we're even protected by the knight, but then this allows bishop to h3. How to respond to this? Finally, queen swap, and then black takes the bishop and goes to a winning endgame. Last cheeky attempt could be rook to g1, pinning the knight, but then rook to h6, pawn takes, and then rook to g6 wins for black. So in this type of position, we went through knight accepting the sacrifice and the disaster that happens next. Also e4 and everything, but what happens after pawn takes in c5? And as we said, in the vast majority of cases, we just have to keep going with the pawn. We didn't just play g5 to keep the pawn in g5 forever. g4 has to come. White takes. What happens? This is a type of scenario we haven't seen yet. White takes in g4 with the pawn in order to try and safeguard some sort of integrity for the king side. The bishop takes back, and after knight to h2 attacking the bishop. How to respond to such threat? Rook to g8. We're gonna start piling up on the king. A move like e4 now just cannot happen because of bishop e2, h3 attacking potentially f1, and a move like g3 immediately is still met by bishop h3, and after rook e1, black can take in g3, and that's going to be game over. So what happens if white takes the bishop? Then black takes back, and we're threatening checkmate. So after knight f3 defending such a square, the bishop can finally recapture in c5. So after g3, which allows in the future moves like king g2 and the rook to come and safeguard the very weak file, black castles long. And let's pay attention to the fact that bishop h7 is not winning a free pawn because of rook g7 winning a tempo, since the other rook will come anyway. So let's have a look at this other move, which seems to be making much more sense, which is pawn to b4. Obviously we can't take, there's no sacrifice here, nothing really happens like that. Bishop to d6, and we're winning here because we're sacrificing, and it's inevitable. So if, for example, white plays a4 to continue the attack on the queen side where our king is, bishop takes, pawn takes, check, and after king h1, how to finish this off? The knight moves from c to e5, from c6 to e5. The idea obviously is to swap stuff. So after queen to g2, it looks like we gave up a piece, but then we still attacking the bishop. King takes back, and then we take this. Black is up material and initiative.